Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Hello, mega orderers. I have exciting news, very orderly news. Wednesday, the 14th of May at 5:30 British summertime, we have a live show back with our partners at RUSI. I will be interviewing Tom Keating, the director of the Center for Finance and Security at RUSI. It's going to be really fun stuff. We're going to discuss the potential role of ordering institutions like the IMF, EU, G7, the role that Britain can play as an ordering power, and the power of markets to reassert order against Trump's crazy disorder. Okay, please follow the link in the show notes to the Substack to become a paid member of the Substack and book to attend the event. Can't wait to see you there. We can seat like 200 people. It's going to be amazing. And now back to Alex and I answering live questions. I'm Jason Pack.
And I'm Alex Hall, and this is Disorder,
a podcast where Alex and I occasionally link up in DC or Virginia to try to find that tiny, tiny semblance of order lurking underneath the evil Doge purge in our mad, mad, mad world.
Yes, because we're both here in DC and we're both leaning into the mic like we are doing a kind of duet. And today we are going to be discussing as a kind of theme in this mad, mad world, how the US appears to be going in one direction and Europe is going in the other, handling different internal and external challenges in completely different ways. What does that mean for the UK?
Yes, and I'd like to delve into how the Doge sledgehammer has been taken to the administrative state, and the chaotic and crippling tariffs are truly the final proof. If you needed more proof, this is the final proof that we are in fact living in the global enduring disorder.
Amen to that, Jason. You came out with the title of this podcast, and boy, unfortunately, is it true.
I mean, as I've taken to saying my mantra, God, I hate being right. I just really wish I wasn't correct about so many things, and I really hate having foresight. Because my idea, going back to 2018, was that Trump was a deliberate disorderer, meaning he didn't care to achieve specific goals, whether that's reshoring manufacturing to the U.S. or changing the relationship between Russia and the U.S. He doesn't care about the specific goals. He merely cares about throwing shit in the zone and disordering things and being unpredictable. And every own goal that's possible is a success for him because it's just about disorder.
Yeah, so you got that right in 2018. But what's certainly true is that he's come back in 2025 and he continues to disorder our world, but he's doing it with a far more ruthless sense of purpose and with a larger group of sycophants around him. I mean, there's just not nearly enough pushback compared with his first administration. But Jason, here we are both in DC. On previous episodes, I've talked about what it's actually been like to live here through this unfolding chaos. You're jetting in from London, and you've been here for a few days now. How does it feel coming back here? What's been your sense now that you've been here?
Yeah, on the one hand, DC has looked the same. There are the same traffic jams as ever, security getting into the Rayburn buildings as it always was, and there was an ability to brief a congressional staffer, and the Libya conference that I was a part of seemed to be presenting bullet points for the new administration and mediating between factions like everything was normal. On the other hand, there's an apocalyptic air to being in DC. I was surprised to see the number of restaurants that I really like that are all closed and going out of business, and shops that look very desolate. And what struck me in my government meetings is the bizarre thing that one does when you're in like autocratic Arab countries. You dance around the mentioning of the name of the ruler so that you talk about, oh, given the need to X, and you don't say, because Trump is only going to want to do this if it's connected to the Abraham Accords. They don't say that. They just dance around the name of the ruler in the presentation. And we had an 8-hour conference on Libya and American policy towards it. People tried to avoid saying Trump. They avoided saying the administration, or avoided saying that no one is going to care about this in this administration. So that part tapped into something that I know really well. But then to talk about my socializing, this is a shop town. Everyone who's here is in some way involved in either they work at State Department, or they're lawyers who do this, or they're lobbyists for a tech company. I mostly have friends who work in the government, and they're all Democrats. Or I have two very right-wing friends, one who's a lobbyist who had a position in the first Trump administration, or a New York friend who is competing to be in the ideological level of stuff. And the code switching that was required for me to go from meeting my friend who had to lay off 90% of his staff and fight with Doge people who took his card to access his computer, to then hanging out with an old college friend who's like, it's so great that we're, cutting the fat. And I get really pumped with the opportunity. We can create more peace with other Muslim countries and Israel. And it's great what's going on. And the ideological switch that I have to have the coffee with one and then the other. And they look at their faces, and then, I kid you not, the wife of one of my Republican friends is like, I don't know if I agree with my husband, whose name I won't mention, seeing these billionaires running everything, because I don't think they should have so much executive compensation at their firms. And it's not fair that, so much money has gone to the top 1%. I'm really listening to Bannon's podcast much more these days. Jason, can you have him on your podcast? Can you talk about the need to do this stuff? Bannon has just been so right, and I have to look at her. I wanted to conceal the fact that I consider it a lunacy to have friends who one is on the Muskian/Zionist wing of the party, and then the other one is on the Bannonite wing of the party, and I have to deal with them.
Yeah. So I think what I'm experiencing here in DC is we're all speaking in coded language, and Trump is like Voldemort in Harry Potter, he who shall not be named. Everybody dances around the subject, but anytime I meet anybody or I connect with somebody, I was at a baseball tournament this weekend. My son's in a new team, so it was a new set of parents, and we all skated around the subject. Oh, how are you doing? What do you do? Where do you live? And it turned out that one parent was the former administrator of USAID in the Armour administration. And we sort of alluded to it carefully. It's like, how are things? Well, things have not been great, a little bit of chaos. And gradually, crab-like, we approached an understanding that we both felt fairly similarly about this administration. And so finally, I put my cards on the table and said, yeah, well, actually, I worked in government and this is how I feel. And he said, well, actually, I worked in government. And then he told me what he did. So that's exactly it. We skate around it. But a few weeks ago, I had brunch with a Republican contact because I wanted to get his sense of how things were going. And I had to sit there sipping my tea and trying not to choke on my breakfast bagel as he just celebrated everything the administration was doing. And the low point for me, and I'm sorry, because we don't always have to bring everything back to Israel, but we were talking about Israel. He said, well, and at the end of the day, people like me, we actually really don't care about Ukraine much anyway. I care far more about Israel and
He said
what
it
they're
that
doing.
directly, like that's a trade-off. That's
Not
weird.
a trade-off, but he said, and I absolutely love what this administration's doing on Israel.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're going to give Israel free rein and they can just starve them out. I sort of choked and said, do you mean the Palestinians? And he said, yeah. And I said, but they're people too. And he said, who gives a shit? I had to continue the conversation. And he just had no idea. I have friends in Gaza who are being traumatized beyond belief. And so, yeah, there is this sort of dissonance and you sort of skirt around it. It's horrible.
It is weird how this administration's culture has allowed some people to say out loud the bit that used to be quiet.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that some of my Republican friends and right-wing Zionisty ones are only one subset of people who might have known, this is a thought I have, but I'm not supposed to say. And they might not even say within their own circle, but that's all unleashed. Like whether it's anti-trans stuff and people will be like, well, I think they should all be back in the closet or that shit should be chopped off. You know what I mean? They might have been thinking that before, but it's now open season.
That's what free speech is, right? The ability to be really vile.
It appears that free speech is the ability to say that the people that you hate, you think should disappear. I would say that there is a way in which those of us in the center who are trying to get things done and operate with different branches of the political current, we are muzzled now, and we have to dance around like crabs because I wanna have Republican friends, and I want to know people who are getting appointed to DAS, and that's Deputy Assistant Secretary level positions, because that's important for me to be able to shape things, right? We're muzzled and they are unleashed. And then I think that there's something else going on, which is the brazenness of Schadenfreude. And I apologize for my German pronunciation being so bad. When I saw in the eyes of some Republicans at this conference how happy they are that some people's stocks have plummeted, that they're dying in Gaza, that they're this and that. It was a joy. There is something psychologically, I mean, I need to like convene shrinks on this podcast to really understand why is there so much joy. These people didn't gain that money. It's just that people that they dislike are losing tons and their 401ks are getting hammered. I saw that joy, and I want to talk about a bizarre, crass joke that happened at the conference because I think it illustrates something that I didn't see before coming here. This conference on Libya on the Hill is organized by a Libyan medical doctor from the West Coast who's like pioneered some heart surgeries and made millions, and he uses his own money every year to bring together things. And he's gotten very good at this. It has top, Austrian defense experts and Italians who work on the migration issue. And like, this is a top conference. And I've always known that this gentleman is on the right-wing side of things. And this plays out differently in Libyan terms. If you're a Republican and a Libyan, you can support the East and Haftar and the House of Representatives. And I understand that he comes at this from his perspective. But there was a Canadian who was present. He said something like, normally I wouldn't allow you to participate in the National Council for the U.S.-Libya relationship, but since you guys are going to be the 51st state, I think that we can allow our Canadian younger cousins. And I'm thinking this is on air. This is Mike. This is going out on live Facebook. Tens of thousands of Libyans are watching this live on Libyan Facebook. It's an important domestic Libyan political event. And I realized it's not only that he doesn't get how offensive this is, he's glorying in the fact we're Americans and these little tiny Canadians are now going to be crawling to like participate in our events. And then they're going to maybe be saved by being the 51st state. He didn't grasp how awkward and uncouth that is.
Oh my God. I mean, that is just so grotesque. I completely understand why Mark Carney and the Canadians are absolutely boiling mad.
Yeah, but I would say elbows up to them. They're doing
Elbows up.
amazing
I love
stuff. They're the ones putting out the billboards and trying to undermine the tariffs. They're leading the way for the Europeans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think Mark Carney is handling this absolutely brilliantly. And it would be fantastic if the Liberal Party win the elections. That would also be.
I don't know how to wager on this, but I would be shocked if anyone associated with Trump like Polyev is could win this election.
Yeah. No, I mean, there is blowback. But the other thing I think I have to mention before we get into the meat of this is I do have many, many, many Republican friends who are as horrified and shocked as we are.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I have never Trumpian friends and libertarian friends who are shocked. I didn't mention them because they're not as interesting from the code switching of, literally, I want to have this lifestyle where I can hang out with someone who served under the previous Trump administration. I'm shocked when the wife calls out a disagreement with the husband because she's on the Bannonite wing and he's on the Muskite wing.
Yeah. She's not disagreeing in a way that you can relate to.
Yes.
And that's like the discussion we had about Nosaj and Zelalala. Zelalala is on the Bannonite wing and Nosaj is on the Muskian wing, right?
100%. He's a techno-nihilist. And they may have to make appearances because they've come in from Budapest and West Virginia for other parts of the episode.
They have. Okay, so we wanted to run in this episode with a few themes about how the US and the Europe are sort of drifting apart and handling things in a very different way. And I kind of summarized it as three main categories. One is how we're tackling internal threats to our democracy, whether it's misinformation, whether it's foreign money, interference in our elections. The second one is how we're handling national security challenges, with Europe still seeing Russia and the war in Ukraine as posing a threat, not just to Ukraine, but to our rules-based order, rewarding aggression, whereas Trump appears to be moving in the direction of kind of Russia, you can have your Eurasian space, we'll have our American space. We'll see how it plays out in China, but there are people in the administration under Pete Hegseth in the Department of Defense who, although they pitch themselves as China hawks, are actually sowing some seeds of doubt about how strongly they would support South Korea or Japan or even Taiwan. So that's on the national security sphere. And then the third area is economics. And we're recording this episode just a week after the huge economic effect of Trump's tariff announcements. So those are the sort of three broad categories. So first of all, democracy. I mean, from where I sit, Trump doesn't believe in democracy. He has a completely values-free approach, both to internal domestic politics and international politics. And he is stretching the bounds of every check and balance in the US system, including by pushing back on the judiciary and arrogating to himself a lot of the budgetary powers that should sit with Congress. Meanwhile, Europe is trying to build up its defenses, fight back on misinformation. And I think there's an interesting test case here, which is the reactions to the Le Pen case. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I'm very passionate about this. I can't tell you how joyed I was when I heard that term, exécution provisoire. I'm watching the BBC. Hugh Schofield says this. Like, yes.
Your French accent is better than your German accent.
I don't do any German.
Shut up.
100%. I don't speak German, right? I can't even pretend.
Fire away.
I admire a lot of things about the EU, And I think some things are dysfunctional, but that their laws work. And I think it's really important to point out that Sarkozy is in the slammer for donations that he got from Gaddafi, and he's been under house arrest, and he's an establishment politician. So it's not like they've pick and choose and only put neo-populists away. They have laws, and if you misappropriate or embezzle EU funds, you can't run for office. And then, even if you're an establishment centrist former president, if you violated a law, even one that is not affecting anything anymore, no one is hurt by the fact that he took this Gaddafian money in 2008, but that's the law. And if you violate it, even if you're a former president, you go to jail. And then we look at America. We have laws about the use of confidential documents. We have laws about the use of private email servers and texting national security information. And then when it comes to Trump, we have laws about calling up Georgia state officials and say, would you find me 11,000 votes? Everyone knows that he violated them. These cases were brought, but our judiciary was not strong enough to win the case and get the person behind bars. So when I heard about Le Pen, yes, there's going to be a backlash, and some people are going to move to Jordan Bardella, and they're going to be like, she's a martyr for democracy, and it should just be decided by an election rather than the courts. I just couldn't disagree more. Democracy isn't about the people just randomly deciding on every issue. I don't want to have a plebiscite about tariffs. I want to have rules and law and economists and experts and judges who decide based on criteria. And the EU has certain criteria. There are funds that you get from the EU that you can use to run your Brussels office. You can't expropriate those funds and use them for a bodyguard for your get out the vote drive for your partisan elections. And she's barred now for these 5 years pending potential appeals. And I just have great admiration for the French.
So I think it's really interesting, the different reactions to this. I mean, first of all, it seems to me a fairly reasonable bar that if you want to run for public office, you should not be a convicted felon.
Alex, we have such bourgeois values, you and me.
I also feel it's fairly reasonable that you could say, okay, we're not talking traffic offences or speeding, which would disqualify me, sadly, but you're talking about activities that are directly linked to her role as a politician. She was misappropriating European Parliament funds to boost her own political party and standing in France. So there is a direct link between her political ambitions.
And ironically, she supported the very law that she was hung on.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She
Okay.
in 2017 or 2018 said, you know what's critical is people who are engaged in corruption, like these establishment elites, must never be able to run for office. I support the exact law that they hoisted her on her petards. So cry me a river with her crocodile tears that she's like, oh, no, but it needs to be decided. It's like, no, we have you saying that you support these anti-corruption laws.
I think it's a French word, hoist by her own petard. So one is, I feel like it's not an unreasonable bar. Secondly, the criticism has been that this is politicized justice. But justice is blind. If you are found guilty, you are convicted. The people who are guilty of politicizing these cases are those who are arguing, no, this is politicized justice. And this is what Trump did very successfully in the cases brought against him in the last few years. He actually galvanized political support by saying this is a political witch hunt against me and by implication all my voters. But assessing the facts of a case and reaching a verdict is not a politicized act. It's the reaction to it that's been politicized. But thirdly, and this is the bit that worries me, the way the Le Pen case has been reported and covered in much of the media, people like Trump and his supporters are actually winning the argument. And I was shocked to see that The Economist ran an editorial on the Le Pen case saying it was a mistake to bar her from running for office.
absurd.
This is something that the people should decide. And the debate has successfully been shifted, not from what were the actual things she did that she was found guilty of, But was the sentencing correct? So it has now moved the terms of the debate. So I find this very worrying.
You do the crime, you pay the time.
Yeah.
This is the punishment for that offense. Do you know what I mean? The critical retort is Sarkozy, who was from an other political tendency, also had to suffer the consequences. You're right that we have done a horrible job in the center of the political debate in the Anglosphere, explaining what the rule of law is. The average punter doesn't grasp why democracy or the rule of law matters to them. Why does it matter in their life?
I'm going to disagree with you there.
Oh.
I think they do understand the rule of law, and the rule of law underpins everything in American society, business life, civic life. And I actually think Americans have had a good faith in their justice system. It is being challenged from the top down. It's a top-down distortion of the rule of law that is poisoning what had been a reasonably stable judicial system, I would argue.
Okay.
I'm not going to dismiss the average punter. They may not realize.
I know. I want to make a different point, though, between justice in America and Europe. I thought one of the things we're focusing on in this episode is how America and Europe are diverging. And they have been diverging, even all the way back with, say, Hillary Clinton and her private email server. That was a real thing. It's very difficult in America to get powerful people to account. And I think that slightly differs in Europe. So, for example, we had the 2008 financial crisis. Mm-hmm. What was the number of top executives who made money at subprime stuff who saw behind bars? Zero. And in Europe, there were more accountability for people who did insider trading in this, that, and the other. Yes, we have the SEC. Yes, we have the courts. But one of the things we've seen in the inability to get Trump behind bars is if you have a lot of power, you can have fancy lawyers and you can have these appeals and you can defeat whatever. I love a French or Swedish style state system. The state, whether it's completely neutral or perceived as neutral, it's powerful enough to implement things, to implement lockdowns, to implement, in the Swedish case, openings. When Swedes were told, it was fascinating, before the vaccine, we now declare that you must go out and go shopping. People were not afraid. They went shopping. That, I mean, to say that it turns me on is getting how visceral that is. The Swedish and French states are strong enough to do stuff and maybe to kickstart defense spending and invent things and regulate AI. And what I take from this is maybe a more ethereal or academic point than most people care about. I want to live in a country that has a strong enough state to build a new kind of road or railroad or create fiber optic cables in poor neighborhoods. And I don't see that existing here.
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, that Ronald Reagan quote, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help," the 8 most feared words in the English language, have so poisoned the well. There is this perception of government as something that is bad. But as we know, and as you've just cited, in Scandinavian countries, there is a really good social contract and there is trust between the people. And
it's been eroding, but they had it until the 80s and 90s. And the irony is everything that America has led the world in, the space race, the internet, the roads, the this, the that, the government either did it or seeded it.
Or enabled it,
yes.
provided some kind of framework for it. And what's really tragic about this administration, I mean, you talked about the Security Exchanges Commission. This administration is busy gutting all the institutions of the state that are designed to provide the platform for a well-functioning society. And they're deliberately gutting it because all these billionaires and techs, they don't like the regulations. They don't like the level playing field. They don't like the restraints on what they can do.
And the irony is then their companies are going to be less competitive abroad. It actually won't even help them make the profits that they think.
Well, we're going to get on to the economics, but nothing that is going on right now is actually, I mean, watching the stock market slide and also watching the sort of Amazon and Tesla shares absolutely crater. That's the one flicker of schadenfreude that I take away from all of this. So I just want to talk a little bit about free speech as well, and then let's come to foreign policy. The free speech thing, this is the other irony, is J.D. Vance having the absolute nerve to lecture Europe about free speech when everything they've been doing in America in the last few weeks has been to inhibit and repress free speech. They are enabling hate speech, enabling misinformation, and clamping down on free speech at universities. They are bullying judges. They are bullying law firms into not taking up cases.
This bullying of law firms has not gotten enough attention. This, to me, seems absolutely critical.
It's a form of repression of free speech as well, right?
It's not only a repression of free speech, it's going to literally make it impossible to stand up against the government. In other words, this is like on the Orbanista level of thing. If you didn't do what we wanted, you can't do any federal cases and you can't participate in a federal court or whatever. That is making justice non-blind, and God knows how this plays out.
But the point I wanted to make here as well is that I'm a non-native American. I have friends, definitely ones with green card holders, who are now completely silent because they're worried about being deported. But I have seen a couple of Trump administration officials raise the possibility that they will denaturalize non-native born Americans as well, if they are seen to be anti-patriotic. Well, I'm very critical of this administration. I'm pretty critical of Israel. That doesn't make me anti-patriotic. It makes me an active, engaged citizen of this country, entering in normal political discourse. And they are now suppressing that kind of speech, saying this is anti-patriotic, you don't like America, you are hostile to this country.
They don't understand what America really is.
But I'm
These clowns.
I'm
You understand what America is or is supposed to be much better than these clowns, Alex. And I will be calling my senator to make sure that you do not denaturalize. Let's just put it this way. And I think your husband is rather well connected to avoid that happening.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
If we get to that point, by the way, the world will probably be on the verge of nuclear war. We're going to have greater issues than your denaturalization. In other words, if it gets to that level.
Jesus. Zella, my alter ego, will be safe.
I think we have to ask Alex, when we're talking about, does it get to the point that you might be denaturalized or that they bar these law firms from being able to practice, about the backlash. I spoke to a very close friend of mine who has ambassadorial rank and, served in various Democratic administrations. And he's talking about the fact that with these tariffs, cratering the economy 20%, erasing 3 or 4 trillion of Americans' net worth, they're obviously going to get crushed in the 2026 midterms. The idea that there isn't going to be the evolution like we had in Britain, whereby 52% of people voted for Brexit, and a few years later, only 43% supported. So X number voted for this Trump administration, but give it 2 years when their pocketbooks have hit. Obviously, they're going to lose the midterms. Ergo, the voter suppression and disinformation campaign is already afoot. We mentioned the issue of barring certain law firms. We haven't gotten to the protests in D.C., but we wanted to give the listeners who don't necessarily live in the U.S. or they don't know what's going on, the insight, which is that the first major protest happened on April 5th. And I think we're beginning to see the movement towards a breaking point, which is that it was quite quiet when he won the election and no one could talk of a massive uprising or popular protests. But now millions of people from towns as far from the capital as Cincinnati and San Francisco took to the streets. And as goods and services become very expensive and people are being laid off increasingly, not just in the public sector, but the private sector as the economy is cratering, I wonder what your thoughts are about, are we going to see massive civil disobedience? I don't love people vandalizing random Teslas. I don't think that that's good, because that's not lawful and it doesn't help things, but civil disobedience against the government, saying we do not accept the loss of these jobs at USAID and USIP and NIH employees standing up, which we haven't really seen, against these hostile attempts to take over their institutions. So maybe we're going to have some struggle within the federal government or with citizens against the government, more like, things that we'd seen in South Africa or other parts of the world when people oppose the ideology of the government.
Okay, so this is another area where I think Europe and America have had different experiences, because in Europe, we've seen in Serbia, in Romania, in Georgia, in Turkey, if you have a broad definition of Europe. I mean, we have seen there is an experience in Europe of resisting tyranny, of fighting for one's rights. And the war in Ukraine and the proximity to Russia has reminded us of the fragility of our democracy. And so even if you disagree with how the Le Pen case has been handled, you also have people coming out and protesting. I mean, and that's a sign of a healthy democracy. In the US, we are beginning to see that movement. And it's a bit frustrating to see this weekend's protests described by most newspapers as tens of thousands, because as far as I can tell, it was hundreds and hundreds of thousands.
And over the course
in
of the
the
country, it's
villages.
more than 1 million. Yeah.
And it was including in deep red states as well, not just the coasts. So you are beginning to see that. But I spoke to Tom Malinowski, a former guest on this podcast, a former congressman from New Jersey. And I asked him, why hadn't we seen more popular resistance? And he said, the trouble is in the US, most Americans just have this intrinsic faith in our system, and they have no experience of this. They don't know how to resist. So it's going to take time for these protests to gather momentum. However,
I think the tariffs will be the breaking point, and that things are going to gather momentum, because it's all abstract when you're in Cleveland and it's like, oh, this hurts the Canadians. Or I hear that like lots of people who have PhDs and are Africa experts have been fired. But these tariffs are literally going to reshape the global economy and going to hurt nearly everyone.
Absolutely. So you're already seeing businesses closing plans, they're not taking forward an investment, they're suspending production. I mean, that's already happened over this weekend. But I think what's been going on in Washington, the slashing of USAID, the closing of the US Institute of Peace, the shutting down of the Voice of America, these aren't things that people in the heartland worry about. They've bought the narrative that government is a problem, it's got too bloated. I also don't think the deportations of migrants, sending them to prison in El Salvador, not everyone is happy with that, but Trump campaigned on clamping down on illegal immigration. So that's not the issue. But the threat to Social Security, the shutting down of Social Security offices, the cuts to the Department of Veteran Affairs that are beginning to affect veterans, the cuts to various Medicaid projects, the cuts to medical research programs, the shutting down of national park offices. This is all having a ripple effect. Then you've got the tariffs. Then you've got this global stock meltdown. Maybe a lot of people don't own stocks. Most people do not have huge investments and savings. But the ripple effects of that.
I think the ripple effects are huge.
And so I think there's going to be two movements. I think there is growing popular dissatisfaction. I told you, Zella, my alter ego, is already feeling this in her home state. So I think you've got a groundswell of opposition beginning to emerge at the ground level. You are already beginning to see Republican senators coming out in small numbers, but criticizing the tariffs. They're not criticizing the president. It's this Voldemort thing. They don't want to break with the president, but they are beginning to question the tariffs. I count 5 senators who've now come out on public record.
5 Republican senators.
5 Republican senators. Then you have the businesses and the corporate execs. Again, they don't want to criticize Trump publicly, but behind the scenes, I suspect they are calling the Republican senators and going, excuse me, what the fuck is going on? This is a disaster. So I do think we may be reaching that critical point. However, Trump right now is not showing any signs of backing down, and he has around him such a coterie of sycophants that the slightest chance that these protests turn a little bit violent, I don't rule out them trying to call a national emergency.
They'll do the Insurrection Act. I think that
So
literally if he'll take as slender a reed as, oh, some federal buildings have been blocked, I need to use the Insurrection Act.
absolutely.
And then he's going to call out the National Guard and do all the things that he tried to do with the BLM protests in the first administration. But then he had centrist, normal Republicans like Mark Milley and McMaster to deal with. And now he has only the sycophants that you mentioned. And God forbid, I mean, this is going to allow us to slide into the non-democracy. And, I don't want to pull full Bill Maher on the mega orderers and say he's going to try to postpone the midterm elections. But I think he's such a disorderer, he will not mind if there is massive civil disobedience and then repression so as to create a national emergency.
I couldn't agree more. It's not the economic effects of all that's happening that worry me the most. It's the political implications of all that is happening, the destabilizing and the economic impacts of this will make people angry and desperate. And angry and desperate people can be lured into doing angry and desperate things. They will blame the migrants. They will blame the libs. They will blame the deep state.
100%.
They will blame political judges. This is what we've seen in other regimes that have moved to autocracy. So that is what worries me most about this moment.
100%. I would argue he's deliberately disordering because it creates fear among people, and the more they're out of work and the more that they're suffering, the more they can be prey to extremist ideologies. After the break, we talk about the incoherence of Trumpian foreign policy.
This episode is brought to you by GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. Get the most out of your vehicle with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco original equipment. The only parts designed, engineered, tested, and backed by General Motors. You can find your perfect fit for most makes and models and choose from 3 tiers of parts, including GM OE or gold and silver aftermarket parts. Visit gmparts.com for more information.
And now, 2 pigeons bemoaning the fact you can choose the TV you want with DirecTV.
So now they can pick out their favorite entertainment when they sign up and save money?
You mean if you like sports?
You can get a sports pack.
What about entertainment?
Entertainment pack.
It's like finding an old pizza with your favorite toppings, which for me would be pineapple and toenails.
Pineapple?
Pay for the TV you want, not the TV you don't. Genre pack starting at $34.99 a month. Visit DirecTV.com for more information. New residential customers only. Local channels vary by market. Services renew monthly unless you cancel online. Credit card required. Restrictions apply.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original. Which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
So, on to foreign policy, Alex.
Okay, so fairly extensive evidence that Europe and America are pulling in different directions on democracy and free speech. Then we see national security and foreign policy. This seems to be an administration that has a completely values-free foreign policy. As far as I'm aware, they've not reacted in the slightest to the challenges to democracy in Turkey that we've seen taking place over the last couple of weeks.
I think they love it.
They are echoing some of Putin's talking points about the conflict in Russia. They are pursuing aggressive territorial claims on Canada, Panama, Greenland, therefore giving some kind of ideological cover for China and Russia and other aggressive states. And Europe is responding to the political moment by trying to invest more in its defense, but also to try and push back against disinformation, to try and shore up its system against hostile nation states, whereas I would say America is becoming increasingly like Russia or China under this administration. How do you see it, Jason?
I think saying that the U.S. is like Russia might be a bridge too far.
It is so far.
But what it is
All that, maybe.
yeah, that's, I think, a better analogy. What it is it's unreliable. And I'm happy that the Europeans have got the defense industry stuff together. They have the idea of owning common arms. And obviously Merz in Germany has gotten rid of the debt limit for their ability to finance their rearmament. The problem is that those things take 3 to 5 years before those new weapon systems are going to be ready. And of course, I have anger that this was so predictable that they could have just gotten their act together and passed this legislation then. It's like the same thing in Ukraine. If Biden was going to give them offensive HIMARS that allowed stuff, and he did it in 2024, well, he could have done it in 2022, and they would have made all those breakthroughs, and they could have won the war. And if the Europeans, like we've spoken about with Bill Browder, do end up seizing the Russian frozen assets and using it to fund Ukrainian defense, if they do it in 2026, well, then they could have done it in 2022 or 2023, and then the Ukrainians could have won the war.
Yeah.
So,
failure to prepare, absolutely.
Yes, there is a divergence, and this decoupling is also going to be a recoupling. We saw Japan, South Korea, two nations that were on opposite sides of World War II and have a lot of cultural things against each other. They're going to work increasingly together. I think that in the larger East Asian sphere, everyone is going to be sucked into China. If you're Vietnam and you have these horrible tariffs, yeah, you're going to try to renegotiate with Trump, but the first thing you're going to do when those renegotiations don't yield what you wanted is become a satrapy of China. And then if you're the Philippines and you need this, that, and the other, the Philippines has always been very close to the United States. You know, we colonized them and we have military bases there. But if they have tariffs on their products, they're going to need to become closer to China. And the Europeans might want to reintegrate into the American orbit, but if they're not getting what they want, they're going to create something like a G6, and they're going to be increasingly distant. On foreign policy, though, the thing that worries me most is not our allies doing stuff without us. I think that could be healthy, right? Because there's been too much American leadership in the system, and Europeans are unable to lead this G6 or to make defense decisions on their own, and maybe they will become able to. What worries me is that Trumpian foreign policy thinkers don't have any coherence. You might have heard of Laura Loomer, who is like a right-wing influencer. She's someone younger than me. She does some TikToks, and she says some batshit crazy things. I see her become something like the Rasputin influencer of our modern age. I'm taking that line from Bret Stephens, who is calling her the new Rasputin, because just before Trump announced the tariffs on Liberation Day on April 2nd, he was in the Oval Office meeting with Loomer, and she's like, why don't you fire these CIA people? Why don't you get rid of some of your National Security Council people? And the instant that she said that, he did it. And that is crazy, because this means that Russian disinformation is laundered through various right-wing influencers. If they have sex appeal, they go and they see Trump. Or the fact that Musk is married now to a right-wing influencer and is having his most recent kid with her. This Russian disinformation about who to hire and fire is laundered through them. And the people who are actually taking care of the fact that we have some CIA operatives figuring out some things in Ukraine or making sure that in Vilnius these Russian agents aren't doing whatever, they get fired by these influencers. This is a new level of banana republic insanity. And that's without even talking about loyalty oaths. So I've been in D.C. only 5 days this trip, and friends who are centrist Republicans, meaning to my right, have talked about the fact that their colleagues have faced loyalty oaths. They've been in meetings where they're asked, when did you first buy your MAGA hat? And they say, oh, yeah, I've had a MAGA hat for a long time. Like, great. Show me a photo with you time-stamped in your iPhone showing this MAGA hat. And then they can't, and they get purged. Or can you show me your campaign donations from previous cycles? And it's like, oh, but I donated to Ted Cruz or I donated to Marco Rubio. But you didn't donate to Trump early enough in the 2016 cycle. You can't prove it. You're out. And it's like, what the absolute fuck? who is going to make sure that we have air traffic controllers and that we have CIA people? This could get to the point, if it gets even further on, where literally the U.S. government doesn't function.
That Laura Loomer case is absolutely shocking because what she apparently told the president was exactly as you said. These people weren't sufficiently loyal. Some of them had previously worked with Mitt Romney or John McCain, who Fred absolutely hates. And so Loomer was telling the president these people aren't sufficiently loyal. And she made a particularly obnoxious and vile allegation against one of the senior National Security Council staff who was fired. He's a Chinese American, and she questioned his patriotism and said, well, he's Chinese American, so he's probably an agent of China, which the racism, it is so obnoxious, those kind of allegations. So one, you're sort of clearing out from the system the people with expertise in the intelligence and the security agencies. So we're losing all this valuable expertise, which leaves us wide open to intelligence penetration by the Russians.
But it's so happened since the Signal Gate. He must be inside all of our comms anyway.
So then you've got just the rank amateurism, which Signal Gate reflected. But the other thing that is completely absurd, and maybe this leads us on to the tariffs again, with the sort of third area, is Trump's economic policy. I mean, it is so stupid. If you posit that one of the reasons we're going to let the Europeans insist that the Europeans step up more on Ukraine and their own security is so that we're free to focus on the Asia Pacific and the threat from China, well, you don't then impose tariffs on those self-same allies, destroying their economy so they have less money to spend on their own defense.
And pushing allies towards China.
And retreating from Africa and Latin America, gutting all your aid programs, gutting your Voice of America, which was a way of pushing back against disinformation. I mean, everything about this administration's economic policy and foreign policy is enabling Russia.
The order and the disorder is that they're actively disordering. That is, to me, the meaning of it. They don't want to have a coherent policy. And I want to explain an incoherence in tariffs. I want to say that I'm a free trader, and I believe that if you're the globally dominant economy, as Britain was in the late 19th century, or as America has been since the end of World War II, you should be a free trading nation. And it's very good to run a trade deficit because that means that you have wealth and you're able to purchase and buy the good and best things in the world. So I want to say I'm an anti-tariff person, but there can be an intellectual case for tariffs. And there are two such cases, but they cannot be done simultaneously. The one case is that you'd like to reshore manufacturing. Trump talks about this. And that was something that when Smoot-Hawley was brought in 1930, they also spoke about. If you put in tariffs and said, there is no way that any of these tariffs are going to change. We're going to have them for 20 years. They can't be changed. There are no negotiations. These firms must move back to the States, and we're going to decrease the minimum wage and allow Americans to be hired to compete with unskilled Vietnamese sweatshop workers. Okay, that's a case. Then there is another case. You want a transactional gain from Canada or Vietnam. You're putting the tariffs on to very much hurt the Canadian or Vietnamese economy. They're going to come and negotiate and give you a benny. Oh, we understand that what you really want is that we do X and Y and Z, or we get rid of our import substitution tariff and we're going to negotiate, and then, you'll take it off, and then the car supply chain is going to flow normally. It cannot be the two things simultaneously. I had an insight this weekend that this is like in monetary policy. You can do things that are inflationary. You can do things that are deflationary. But you cannot at the same time do one thing which is inflationary and one thing which is deflationary. He has said, we're going to reshore manufacturing, and the tariffs, what they're really about is getting people to invest in America in factories that take 20 years to come to fruition. But then, hey, I want to shock the Canadians so they come and negotiate, and we're going to take them off within a few weeks. He literally, in that statement, has done the thing which is inflationary, the thing which is deflationary. It cannot possibly work from here. There is no use case.
Okay, so to wrap this up, it's incoherent, it's incompetent, and no businesses can react to this. You can, exactly what you're saying. I mean, they can maybe go with one set of responses or they can go with a different set of responses. But when the policy is so incoherent, businesses are all just going to freeze investments. They are not going to reshore or reinvest until they get some security. I think the saddest thing of all, because I am now an American and I want this country to succeed, is, and this I feel awful about, but when Mark Carney posts his video clips and he goes, elbows up, Canada, I'm kind of cheering the
We're all Canadians now. We're all Canadians now.
And I'm watching the stock market tank. And it's a disaster. And I'm really worried about the people whose life savings are being wiped out. And, you know, there are real people who are being hurt by all this. But there's part of me that is kind of wanting it to come to a head. And therefore, it's just got to tank and tank and tank until finally Republican members
got to get so bad.
Finally Republican. So the thing about Brexit is that Brexit is a slow rolling disaster. And each year, the economic consequences have become more clear. But we didn't fall off a cliff. And that allowed the Brexit backers to say, oh, it was all hype. It was all Project Fear. But here we're very clearly falling off a cliff. Okay.
Yeah, we've fallen off to such a cliff that China is all of a sudden the defender of the rules-based free trading order. If you want to talk about topsy-turvy, the Chinese are like, no, we want to use the WTO rules.
Oh my God, don't make me choke. It's so ironic. And Europe, which has been quite protectionist in its way, is also now standing up. So this is a mad world.
Alex, let's try to order the disorder. So it is going to get so much worse before it gets better. We like to talk about the role of the UK. And Starmer came to Washington. He had a successful visit. Can Starmer be part of ordering the disorder?
I hope so. But I don't think Starmer can keep riding two horses at the same time and keep pretending that he can keep things going with the US under its current trajectory. We've discussed this on previous episodes. He has an impossible situation. Our national security is intertwined with the US. We have a really deep military and intelligence relationship that can't be disentangled. It's not to our advantage for it to be disentangled.
Yeah, Five Eyes is what gives Britain more power in the world.
And ideally, we want to try and survive this moment. But you also have to be honest to yourself and to the British people that things have changed and that we are currently dealing with an administration whose values do not reflect our own and who is pursuing policies that are at odds with the policies that have been part of shoring up global order for the last 40 or 50 years. And I was very disappointed to see an editorial by Keir Starmer in the Daily Telegraph over the weekend.
Starmer wrote in the Telegraph?
He did.
Wow.
Where he wrote, the world is changing around us and we have to rise to the occasion. He said he still supported Ukraine, that he believed in free trade, but he held out the prospect that we need to do a deal with America. And he did not mention the EU once. Oh, no, God. And he is still trying to pretend that there is a way we could just navigate some kind of special relationship with the US. There has an analysis has been done by Best for Britain that the cost of the tariffs that America is imposing, including on the UK, even though the tariffs were less on us than some of our European partners, the cost of those tariffs could be offset by renegotiating a better trade deal with the EU.
Yes, we all know this. And they could get 0.7% of GDP growth just by standards alignment, and they could get 1.2% or 1.4% just by rejoining the customs union.
Ruling it out.
I know. And
And
I want to defend Keir, but I can't defend him on this.
No.
You're right. I want to defend Keir, and I'm very happy that he's becoming the most important European interlocutor with Trump, and that's good.
He's not. He's not the most...
No, he has become the most important diplomat. Merz and Macron are not able to do what he's able to do, but he is making the wrong choice by not seizing this moment. He has a lack of leadership. He's too much of a conventionalist. He could say, you know what? I said this and this and this in my manifesto pledges, but we didn't realize that the global economy was going to be tanked. I now want to try to rejoin the customs union. And I just agree with you, Alex. The mega orderers want that. We all crave for him to step up to this moment and to say, you know what? We're going to try to rejoin the customs union.
I don't think he's the most important interlocutor because he's having zero impact as far as we can tell. The only way the UK, maybe he thinks he's looking after UK interests, but the UK does not have a trade deficit with the US. The trade balance is in the US's favor.
Yeah, it's roughly.
So yeah, we're not getting hit with the same tariffs, but I don't think that's because of any brilliant negotiation by Peter Mandelson in Washington. It's because our trading situation is different. Of course. And yes, he had a great meeting with Trump just before the disastrous Oval Office meeting with Zelensky. Then you had the disastrous meeting with Zelensky and all bets were off. And Theresa May found this to her cost. She kept on having these lovely meetings with Trump. We offered these lovely state visits to the UK. Trump goes to London with Theresa May as his host and then talks about how much he admires Nigel Farage. Nothing can be trusted.
Okay, you're on to something. You've got to stand up. You've got to do a Carney
Mark
fight back.
Carney is doing a better job. And so, yes, he's an interlocutor with Trump, but he's not having any impact.
Alex, you won me over. I'd like to think that Keir is the most important interlocutor and he's succeeding and he's using his bromance with Trump to get concrete things for the UK, but he's probably achieved nothing and he hasn't seized this moment to pivot to the Europeans. So, yes, mega orderers, maybe he can grow a pair and learn from Carney. I hope you've enjoyed this question and answer episode. If you really enjoy asking us questions, why not ask them to us live? You can ask your questions live on the 14th of May, 5:30 p.m. at Russi at 61 Whitehall, when we do a live show entitled Ordering the Global Financial Disorder. It's going to be really fun. I'm going to take your questions with Tom Keating, a 20-year veteran of J.P. Morgan and the head of Russi's Center for Finance and Security. Follow the link in the show notes to the Substack. Pay for the Substack. And follow the link there to book your tickets. Woo! Please do that, and I'll see you there. We're going to be taking slews of listener questions. As always, our producer is the one, the only, the George McDonagh. Our executive producer has been Neil Fearn.
Thank you for listening, and I hope we see an end to this disorder.
From your mouth to God's ears. Mega orderers, I need many podcasts these days, not just to hear the rapid fire news, but to break down how could all this be happening to us. And someone I turn to is Jordan Harbinger. His show was previously named one of Apple's best. We had him on episode 69, Life in North Korea, Kidnapping Stories, and Why Symbolism Matters with Dictators. And that pretty much tells you all you need to know about how the Jordan Harbinger show works. He has deep dive interviews dealing with things like psychology, self-help. He might talk to an FBI negotiator about trust. And he draws on some of our top table disorder guests like Anne Applebaum to think about why disorderers like Iran and Russia can work together. I'm sure you'll love it. So search The Jordan Harbinger Show wherever you get your podcasts.